Before the internet was the primary source for media exposure, it used to be pretty easy in the entertainment industry to know which words would get a musical artist in the most trouble. The typical four-letter curse words, sexual references, racial slurs, and violent threats were all a sure way to get a song kept off of TV screens and radio airwaves to ensure that young children weren't exposed to it. Artists that use a lot of profanity may remake their songs with clean versions that have rewritten lyrics or consist of the explicit phrases bleeped out in order to reach a wider audience or to be able to be played on radio. Seeing music performed on TV and hearing it on the radio is one thing, but in the earlier days of censorship in 1985, when music was sold hand-to-hand in retail record stores, it wasn't as easy to shield impressionable kids from buying music containing profanity. Things were very different in the 80s, a time when there weren't any streaming platforms for parents to listen to music before determining if they were okay with their children listening to it. Back then, mothers and fathers might buy albums for their kids and be clueless about how explicit the material really was. They might even drop their sons or daughters off at the mall to hang out with friends, and their kids could end up buying their own cassette tapes to listen to privately with wild subject matter on them. This is what happened to a mother by the name of Tipper Gore, the ex-wife of Al Gore, who was a U.S. Senator in 1985 and would later serve as the Vice President of the United States from 1993 to 2001 under President Bill Clinton. Why did Tipper Gore decide that music needed to be appropriately rated for children just like movies and theaters? It all started with Prince's Purple Rain, one of the most explosive albums of its time back when it was released in 1984 as a soundtrack to the music drama movie of the same name that also starred Prince. But Purple Rain, the album, would end up becoming a shock to Tipper Gore when she caught her 11-year-old daughter, Karenna, singing the lyrics to the most controversial song on Purple Rain, Darling Nikki, that exposed young Karenna to the concept of female masturbation. Tipper explained how she and her husband Al Gore reacted. The vulgar lyrics embarrassed both of us. At first, I was stunned, but then I got mad. Millions of Americans were buying Purple Rain with no idea what to expect. This situation with her daughter singing Darling Nikki pushed Tipper Gore to take advantage of her place in the political circles in her city, Washington, D.C., in order to form a task force called Parents Music Resource Center, PMRC. But she wouldn't do it all alone. Tipper Gore pulled in 3 other wives of high-level Washington, D.C. figures: Treasury Secretary James Baker's wife, Susan Baker, D.C. City Councilman Chairman John Nevius's wife, Sally Nevius, and Pam Hauer, the wife of area realtor Raymond Hauer. Susan Baker, the wife of the then Treasury Secretary James Baker, made her decision to join PMRC after her 7-year-old daughter listened to Madonna's Like a Virgin and then asked her mother what a virgin was. Tipper Gore was aligned with the Democrat Party, but the other 3 women were married into Republican households. These differences of their political parties were put to the side, and they focused on establishing the Parents Music Resource Center in April of 1985 to start a campaign to target what they considered to be obscene music, with the goal of making this RIAA create a rating to alert music buyers of which albums had explicit material. The PMRC wanted the music industry to label albums that contained obscene content with parental advisory stickers. Parents Music Resource Center was set up as a nonprofit foundation, and it began with $5,000 that was donated to them not by a censor-enforcing politician, but actually by a musician, a member of the Beach Boys named Mike Love. The Parents Music Resource Center had no members, just the 4 founders who were branded as the Washington Wives, and they formed a coalition that included the National PTA and the American Academy of Pediatrics. But these parental advisory stickers wouldn't emerge for many years later because this effort received pushback from many members of the music industry. The Washington Wives used their connections, which expanded in including the wives of 10 U.S. senators, 6 representatives, and a cabinet secretary, in order to leverage their goals. By August of 1985, PMRC pushed 19 record companies to agree to a content warning label. PMRC compiled a list of 15 songs in 1985 pop music that they found to be objectionable, and they gave their reasons why. The list was referred to as the Filthy 15, and it consisted of Prince, Darling Nikki, for sex and masturbation; Sheena Easton, Sugar Walls, for sex; Judas Priest, Eat Me Alive, for sex and violence; Vanity, Strap On Robbie Baby, for sex; Molly Crew Bastard, violence and language; AC/DC, Let Me Put My Love Into You, sex; Twisted Sister, We're Not Gonna Take It, violence; Madonna, Dress You Up, for sex; Wasp, or WASP, Animal, F Like a Beast, sex, language, and violence; Def Leppard, High and Dry, Saturday Night, drug and alcohol use; Merciful Fate, Into the Coven, a coal, Black Sabbath, trash, drug and alcohol use, Mary Jane Girls, In My House, sex, Venom, possess, for occult, and Cyndi Lauper, She-Bop, for sex and masturbation. In fact, just 5 months after the PMRC was launched in April of 1985, the Recording Industry Association of America announced that record labels would put advisories on albums. But the PMRC still wasn't impressed with the RIAA's compromise because they felt that the industry proposal didn't go far enough. PMRC was pushing for all song lyrics to be printed on album covers, album artwork with explicit imagery to be kept behind record store counters, and they even wanted a requirement for labels to think twice about their contracts with musical artists who engaged in sexually explicit or violent behavior during their concerts. The PMRC also proposed a rating system similar to the Motion Picture Association of America that's used for movies. The ratings for the RIAA to use were suggested as X for profane or sexually explicit lyrics, V for violence, DA for drug and alcohol references, and O for occult content. This full-blown rating system was opposed by rock star Frank Zappa and by a group of managers, agents, PR people, artists, and some label execs called the Musical Majority, which was organized by Danny Goldberg, who was the head of Gold Mountain Records and was created in association with the ACLU, and the RIAA rejected these demands, and in response, the RIAA suggested that a label reading parental guidance, explicit lyrics be used instead. On September 19, 1985, during a 5-hour hearing with the United States Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and in attendance were famous musicians like Frank Zappa, Dee Snider, lead singer of the band Twisted Sister, and John Denver, who each testified in strong opposition to PMRC's warning label system and explained why they were against what they believed to be censorship. At the hearing, country music singer John Denver, who was the least controversial singer, explains that the problem with applying labels to art is that whoever is making those decisions could get their interpretations really wrong. In his case, critics confused John Denver's song, noting that his ode to his adopted Colorado home, Rocky Mountain High, was confused and misinterpreted as somehow being a celebration of drug use. During the hearing, Frank Zappa stated in his testimony, "The PMRC promotes their program as a harmless type of consumer information service, providing guidelines which will assist baffled parents in the determination of the suitability of records listened to by very young children. The methods they propose have several unfortunate side effects, not the least of which is the reduction of all American music, recorded and live, to the intellectual level of a Saturday morning cartoon show." About 2 months after the hearing, the organizations came to a settlement in which audio recordings with profanity and graphic content had to either have a warning label reading explicit lyrics parental advisory, or have the album's lyrics attached on the backside of its packaging. Carrie Sherman, the former president of the RIAA, was a lawyer at Arnold & Porter and reflected on the issue by stating, "First, no board can determine what is the appropriate interpretation of a song and therefore how it should be rated. It's up to the listener to decide the meaning of a song. Second, it's simply impractical to rate as many songs as are released in a given year. In 2009, there were 793 movies rated. That same year, there were over 97,000 albums or over 1.2 million songs released. I remember the PMRC complaining about the song Under the Blade by Twisted Sister, which they claim was about SA. But the lead singer for the group, Dee Snider, testified that the PMRC was projecting its violent fantasies into his music, which was actually about the fear that a patient experiences on the operating table before surgery, and that the song was inspired by surgery that the band's drummer had to undergo. At this time, several retail store chains like Walmart and Sam's Club announced they would not carry any parental advisory stickered albums on their shelves in order to provide a family-friendly environment. By 1990, 19 states had considered some form of labeling legislation for sound recordings. This was also the year that record companies announced a revised label, Parental Advisory Explicit Lyrics, that was to remain at a standard size, only in the colors black and white, and was to be located at the bottom right-hand corner of a physical release. But this announcement didn't stop the debate from continuing, with Congress holding more hearings in 1994, which only added some more revision to the parental advisory label. Tipper Gore's nonprofit organization may have partially won their battle to get parental advisory stickers placed on albums with explicit content, but she wasn't a graphic designer, so the creation of the actual sticker image had to be outsourced. Neil was the man that got the job. The Tipper sticker made its debut in 1990, but at the time, there wasn't a consistent image that was being used throughout the music industry. The most commonly used image was a black and white label that was often different even from record label to record label. graphic designer Deborah Norcross created the commonly used parental advisory explicit content graphic after having created 3 different versions of the label while she worked as an art director at Warner Brothers Records, a position she had held for 10 years. But the version we still see today was created by Neil Ashby in 1996, who was the creator-director for RIAA. He later left to start his own agency, Ashby Design, and has designed Grammy-nominated album covers. Neil Ashby pulled his inspiration from those earlier attempts, including those by Deborah. The parental advisory label needed to be easy to read, not have any distracting colors that would take away from an artist's album art, and it needed to work in all sorts of sizes, from small tape cassettes to massive billboard advertisements. According to Neil Ashby, the RIAA CEO at the time, Jason Berman, had the language they wanted for the sticker. They just needed him to design a good logo and a brand standards guide that they could send out to all the record labels. Neil Ashby explained his creative process for the parental advisory sticker, saying, "The logo was done in an hour or two because I had taken probably 6 or 7 different versions and synthesized all those elements into something balanced that simply held up on its own. It had to be legible at the absolute smallest size, and the logo had to be so neutral that it didn't call a whole lot of attention to itself, even though it was screaming, 'Look at me.' It's like Van Gogh doing a beautiful painting and then someone saying, 'Guess what, dude? You have to put this big sticker in the corner.' I did try and make the sticker as low impact as possible. I tried to design it, so it just disappeared." Neil was just a 25-year-old designer at the time, and even though this was a part of his job, he was still very much on the musician side. But he also didn't want to create something that a designer would be embarrassed to use. It couldn't be ugly. It had to be a good piece of design. As the 90s rolled on, many of the biggest hip-hop albums of the era carried the parental advisory sticker, including Nas' Illmatic, Wu-Tang Clan's Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, and Ice-T's Original Gangster. Neil Ashby was a 25-year-old designer who was doing the job he was expected to do, but he still couldn't help being on the side of the musician's plight and his belief to have free speech rights. But at the same time, he didn't want to rise to the challenge of creating a design that could stand the test of time and that he could be proud of, which he explained by saying, "That's why I had such a long shelf life. This thing that everyone is being forced to use, PAL, Parental Advisory Label, is about as good as this can be. I think graphic designers recognize that. It's not imbalanced. It's not cheesy. All of the white and dark spaces work fluidly together. That was done through the typeface weights and the tracking and kerning of the actual letters themselves. The overall effect is one of complete uniformity. It becomes a perfect gray rectangle from a distance with just enough black and white striping. It signifies something that still has that sense of warning to it." Ashby fully understood that the logo that he created was going to grace the covers of countless albums in millions of people's music collections. And all the while, it still had to satisfy political interests and the music executives that were feeling the pressure coming down from DC. But when it was all said and done, the main purpose of keeping young people away from musical recordings and audio comedy albums that contained profanity failed miserably. Kids began craving the very forms of entertainment that their parents, teachers, and religious figures were pushing them away from. The first music album to ever be deemed obscene under the rule of law was by the humor-driven, raunchy rap group 2 Live Crew with their album As Nasty As They Wanna Be, that was cited as pornographic material and went on trial in the spring of 1990 in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida. Then in 1990, 2 Live Crew would also be the first group to have an album get slapped with Tipper Gore's Parental Advisory label on their project Banned in the USA. But that didn't stop the group from turning the release of Banned in the USA into a fight against censorship. The title track incorporated Bruce Springsteen's song Born in the USA, with Springsteen actually giving 2 Live Crew permission himself to do so. In the music video, 2 Live Crew rappers Fresh Kid Ice and Brother Marquis stand up for the First Amendment while accusing politicians of using their group as a way to further their careers. The third member of 2 Live Crew, Luke, launches into an anti-censorship speech toward the end of the video where he proclaims, "This is not China, this is not Russia. This is not the place where they brought down the wall. All you right-wingers, left-wingers, bigots, communists, there's a place for you in this world because this is the land of the free, home of the brave, and 2 Live is what we are." But the impact of the parental advisory stickers seemed to be a reason for the album selling less than expected, earning a gold plaque instead of their previous multi-platinum success, especially with stores Walmart refusing to stock the album, even with a cleaned-up version. The flip side of the warning label is that it alerted curious teenagers to purposely buy albums with parental advisory stickers in hopes of hearing songs that authority figures have tried to hide from them. being that it's extremely difficult to clearly define each individual situation in which a record label or artist should determine if a recording is in fact explicit. The RIAA created a series or a list of recommendations that artists and record labels can use to make a determination. Number 1, contemporary cultural morals and standards should be used in determining whether parents or guardians would find the sound recording suitable for children. 2, the context in which the material is used, as some words, phrases, sounds, or descriptions might be offensive to parents if spotlighted or emphasized, but might not offend if merely part of the background or a minimal part of the lyrics. 3, the context of the artist performing the material as well as the expectations of the artist's audience. 4, lyrics are often susceptible to varying interpretations, and that words can have different meanings and should not be viewed in isolation from the music that accompanies them. 5, such a determination requires sensitivity and common sense, and that context, frequency, and emphasis are obviously important. Isolated or unintelligible references to certain material might be insufficient to warrant labeling a particular sound recording as containing parental advisory label content. 6, these standards apply to the case of a single track commercially released as well as to full albums, whether released in the form of a CD, cassette, or any other configuration. And 7, a sound recording may contain strong language or depictions of violence, sex, or substance abuse, yet due to other factors involved may not merit a designation as containing PAL content. Now, in modern times, the parental advisory logo is typically embedded in the digital artwork for albums purchased online, being that each track on an album that has potentially objectionable content is displayed explicit. This is not a sticker stuck to a compact disc like back in the days or printed. The warning logo remains with the song even after point of purchase, and it only takes one explicit song on an album to have the entire album labeled with a parental advisory logo. Though it is normal to see the parental advisory explicit content warning, it was a huge deal back then, to the point that artists like Ice-T, Metallica, Sonic Youth, and the Ramones even criticized the Parents Music Resource Center and their actual songs. Many musicians have spoken out against Tipper Gore and the PMRC, such as rock group Aerosmith on their song Fine from their 1988 album Pump, that makes mention of Tipper Gore in the line, "Even Tipper thinks I'm alright." The song is explicitly about sex. Then, when accepting a Grammy Award for that album's single Janie's Got a Gun, Aerosmith singer Steven Tyler sarcastically thanked both Tipper Gore and Senator Jesse Helms, who was not a part of the PMRC but publicly supported the group, for making it possible. That if an album has a few dirty words, it'll sell another 1,000,000 copies. Even the rapper Eminem referenced Tipper Gore directly and referenced the PMRC in White America, the opening selection of his 2002 album The Eminem Show, where he states, "To burn the flag and replace it with the parental advisory sticker, to spit liquor in the face of this democracy of hypocrisy, F you Miss Cheney, F you Tipper Gore." But now with far fewer kids even knowing what a music store is, and many artists releasing their own music without being signed to record labels that enforce parental advisories, it's become increasingly impossible to stop kids from hearing inappropriate songs, language, or any explicit form of communication for that matter, without heavy surveillance. Make sure to subscribe for more.